after the baptism of Jesus, the Gospels tell us that he is immediately led by the Spirit into the wilderness for his time of testing. And what's going on here is, I think, a really profound insight into the deep humanity, but also the unique identity of Jesus. The temptations come to him from Satan in these three particular ways that we're told. One is to make stones into bread, the next one is to bow down and worship and the nations will be given to him, and the third one is to go to the temple, throw himself down and be caught by angels. So what's going on with these three? Because they're actually quite obscure when you think about it. Well, the first one, taking stones and making them into bread, is simply trying to meet a legitimate need, food, in an illegitimate way by using his God powers. So he's being provoked by a temptation here that is to use his powers and his divinity in a, you'd say, in an inappropriate way. The next temptation is where Satan lets him see the nations of the world and says, I'll give you these if you bow down and worship me. This is to get to the ends, which is the acquisition of the nations of the world, but by another illegitimate and really quite offensive way to give loyalty to Satan. And then the third one is for Jesus to go to the temple, throw himself down and be caught by angels to fulfill a prophecy that we're told in the Psalms. And Jesus again rebukes that each time by quoting the word of God back to the adversary. Now, something that's important here to realize is that in two of these accounts, the provocation is for Jesus to prove his identity. If you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God. So Satan is really going after his identity as God the Son. But also under test is his humanity, this excruciating experience in the desert, physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, everything just being poured out. Now, I think sometimes what gets caricatured in this is the way in which Jesus was tempted. I think if we could actually have gone to the edge of the wilderness and looked through binoculars to try and see what was happening at a distance, I don't think we would have seen Jesus and then another character, another Satan figure, so two figures in the distance having this back and forward. I don't think that when Jesus was tempted with seeing the nations of the world, he was somehow transported into the stratosphere to see the globe, or when he was tempted to throw himself off the temple, he somehow was, whisked in the air downtown Jerusalem to stand at the top to see what was going on. I think what's happening here is that we're told that Jesus is tempted in the same way as we are. And how are we tempted? We're not tempted when Satan suddenly appears to us in our room or magically takes us places. We're tempted in our minds, aren't we? We're tempted in our innermost being, where our ego and our flesh and our appetites are all at play. And that's where Satan comes and whispers to us the alternatives. And I think that's exactly what was happening to Jesus here. I think if we could look through binoculars, we'd see one solitary person in the desert, Jesus. And that inner battle going on, and the adversary coming to him as a spirit and whispering these temptations and provoking him to prove himself. So I don't think it was this totally different experience that Jesus goes through in this temptation than we do. I think it was intensified, absolutely. There's definitely a uniqueness to how it played out, but I think how the temptations worked were probably the same as what we face, which is the innermost being, our imaginations, our egos, our appetites being played by the adversary. Temptation, when you think of it, is really just when we're standing in front of two doors. I've taught this before, that there's two doors when we're tempted. One says to dishonor God, to do our own thing, and the other one says to honor God. And temptation is really when we're standing in front of those two doors. We're told that temptation itself isn't a sin, but to give into temptation is. So whenever we walk through the door of self to dishonor God, that's a sin. We're told that every single time Jesus stood in front of those two doors, every single time he chose the right door to honor the Father, to lay down his own human desire to perhaps escape the flames and to just try and take a shortcut, every time he resisted that temptation, and he always chose the door to honor the Father. And so good Christology, when we see Jesus clearly, it helps us in our humanity, it helps us with our identity to realize that those are the things that come under assault. our identity as the children of God, our humanity, our legitimate needs, you could say, but to try and then meet them in an illegitimate way. But our desire is to follow Jesus, and every time we follow Jesus, we always go through the door, which is to honour the Father and to be found faithful even under pressure. So may we too experience that tenacity and loyalty towards the Father even when we are put under great pressure. So consider these things. Until next time, peace.